Spiritual Audio. Seneca, on the Shortness of Life. Most human beings, Paulinus, complain about the meanness of nature, because we are born for a brief span of life, and because this spell of time that has been given to us rushes by so swiftly and rapidly that with very few exceptions, life ceases for the rest of us just when we are getting ready for it. Nor is it just the man in the street and the unthinking mass of people who groan over this. As they see it, universal evil. The same feeling lies behind complaints from even distinguished men, hence the dictum of the greatest doctors: life is short, art is long. Hence too the grievance, most improper to a wise man, which Aristotle expressed when he was taking nature to task for indulgent animals with such long existences that they can live through 5 or 10 human lifetimes, while far shorter limit is set for men who are born to great and extensive destiny. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievement, if it were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last by death's final constraint to realise that it has passed away before we knew it was passing. So it is. We are not given a short life, but we make it short. We are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it. Just when ample and princely wealth falls to a bad owner, it is squandered in a moment. But wealth, however modest, if entrusted to a good custodian, increases with use. So our lifetime extends amply if you manage it properly. Why do we complain about nature? She has acted kindly. Life is long if you know how to use it. But one man is gripped by insatiable greed, another by laborious dedication to useless tasks. One man is soaked in wine, another sluggish with idleness. One man is worn out by political ambition, which is always at the mercy of the judgment of others. Another, through hope of profit, is driven headlong over all lands and seas by the greeds of trading. Some are tormented by a passion for army life, always intent on inflicting dangers on others, or anxious about danger to themselves. Some are worn out by self-imposed servitude of thankless attendance on the great. Many are occupied either by pursuing other people's money or complaining about their own. Many pursue no fixed goal, but are tossed about in ever-changing designs by a fickleness which is shifting, inconstant and never satisfied with itself. Some have no aims for their life's course, but their death takes them unawares as they yawn languidly. So much so that I cannot doubt the truth of the oracular remark of the greatest of poets. It is a small part of life that we really live. Indeed, all the rest is not life but merely time. Vices surround and assail men from every side and do not allow them to rise again and lift their eyes to discern the truth, but keep them overwhelmed and rooted by their desires. Never can they recover their true selves. If by chance they achieve some tranquility, just as a swell remains on the deep sea even after the wind has dropped, so they go on tossing about and never find rest from their desires. Do you think that I am speaking only of those whose wickedness is acknowledged? Look at those whose good fortune people gather to see. They are choked by their own blessings. How many find their riches a burden? How many burst a blood vessel by their eloquence and their daily striving to show off their talents? How many are pale from constant pleasures? How many are left no freedom by the crowd of clients surrounding them? In a word, run through them all, from lowest to highest. One calls for legal assistance, another comes to help. One is on trial, another defends him, another gives judgment. No one makes him claim to himself, but each is exploited for another's sake. Ask about those whose names are learned by heart, and you will see that they have these distinguishing marks. X cultivates Y, and Y cultivates Z. No one bothers about himself. Again, certain people reveal the most stupid indignation They complain about the pride of their superiors because they did not have time to give them an audience when they wanted one. But can anyone dare to complain about another's pride when he himself never has time for himself? Yet, whoever you are, the great man has sometimes gazed upon you, even if his look was patronizing. He has bent his ears to your words, he has let you walk beside him, but never designed to look at yourself or listen to yourself. So you have no reason to claim credit from anyone else for those attentions, since you showed them not because you wanted someone else's company, but because you could not bear your own. Even if all the bright intellects who ever lived were to agree to ponder on this one theme, they would never sufficiently express their surprise at this fog in the human mind. Men do not let anyone seize their estates, and if there is the slightest dispute about their boundaries, they rush to stones and arms, but they will not allow others to encroach on their lives. Why? They themselves even invite those who will take over their lives. You will find no one willing to share out his money. But to how many does each of us divide up his life? People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. So, I would like to fasten on someone from the older generation and say to him, I see that you have come to the last stage of human life. You are close upon your 100th year, or even beyond. Come now, hold an audit of your life. Reckon how much of your time has been taken up by a money lender, how much by a mistress, a patron, a client, quarrelling with your wife, punishing your slaves, dashing about the city on your social obligations. Consider also the diseases in which we have brought on our own selves, and the time too which has been unused. You will find that you have fewer years than you reckon. Call to mind when you ever had a fixed purpose, how few days have passed as you had planned, when you were ever at your own disposal, when your face wore its natural expression, when your mind was undisturbed. What work have you achieved in such a long life? How many have plundered your life away when you were unaware of your losses? How many have lost through groundless sorrow, foolish joy, greedy desire, the seductions of society? How little of your own was left to you? You will realize that you are dying prematurely. So what is the reason for this? You are living as if destined to live forever. Your own frailty never occurs to you. You don't notice how much time has already passed, but squander it as though you had a full and overflowing supply, though all the while that very day which you are devoting to somebody or something may be your last. You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. You will hear many people saying, when I am 50, I shall retire into leisure. When I am 60, I shall give up public duties. And what guarantee do you have of a longer life? Who will allow your course to proceed as you arrange it? Aren't you ashamed to keep for yourself just the remnants of your life and devote to wisdom only that time which cannot be spent on any business? How late is it to begin to really live? Just when life must end? How stupid to forget our mortality and put off sensible plans to our 50th and 60th years, aiming to begin life from a point at which few have arrived. You will notice that the most powerful and highly stationed men let drop remarks in which they pray for leisure, praise it, and rate it higher than all of their blessings. At times they long to descend from their pinnacles, if they can in safety, for even if nothing external assails or agitates it, high fortune itself comes crashing down. The deified Augustus, to whom the gods granted more than to anyone else, never ceased to pray for rest and seek respite from public affairs. Everything he said always reverted to his theme, his hope for leisure, He used to beguile his labours with the consolidation, sweet though false, that one day he would live to please himself. In a letter that he wrote to the Senate, after he promised that his rest would not be lacking in dignity, nor inconsistent with his former glory, I find these words: "But it is more impressive to carry out these things than to promise them. Nevertheless, since the delightful reality is still a long way off, my longing for that much desired time has led me to anticipate some of its delight by the pleasure arising from words." So valuable did leisure seem to him, because he could not enjoy it in actuality. He did so mentally in advance. He who saw that everything depended on himself alone, who decided the fortune of individuals and nations, was happiest when thinking of that day on which he would lay aside his own greatness. He knew from experience how much sweat those blessings gleaming through every land had cost him, how many secret anxieties they concealed. He was forced to fight first with his fellow countrymen, then with his colleagues, and finally with his relations, shedding blood on land and sea, driven to fight in Macedonia, Sicily, Egypt, Syria, Asia, almost every country. He turned his armies against the foreign enemies when they were tired of shedding the Roman blood. While he was establishing peace in the Alps and subduing enemies established in the middle of his peaceful empire, while he was extending the boundaries beyond the Rhine, the Euphrates, the Danube, at Rome itself, Murena, Caepio, Lepidus, Egnatius, and others were sharpening their swords against him. Nor had he yet escaped their plots, when his daughter and all the noble youths bound to her by adultery, as though by an oath, kept alarming his feeble old age. As did Lullus, and a second formidable woman linked to Antony. He cut away these ulcers, limbs and all, but others took their place. Just like a body with a surfeit of blood, which is always subject to a hemorrhage somewhere, so he longed for leisure, and as his hopes and thoughts dwelt on that, he found relief from his labours. This was the prayer of a man who could grant the prayers of mankind. When Marcus Cicero was cast amongst the men, like Catiline and Claudius and Pompey and Crassus, some of them undisguised enemies and some doubtful friends, when he was tossed about in the storm that struck the state, he tried to hold it steady as it went to his doom. But at last he was swept away. He had neither peace in prosperity nor patience in adversity. And how often does he curse the very consulship which he had praised without ceasing, though not without good reason. What woeful words he uses in a letter to Atticus when the elder Pompey had been conquered, and his son was still trying to revive his defeated forces in Spain. "Do you want to know," he said, "what I am doing here? I am staying a semi-prisoner in my Tuscan villa." He then goes on to bewail his former life, to complain of the present, and to despair of the future. Cicero called himself a semi-prisoner, but really and truly, the wise man will never go so far as to use such an abject term. He will never be a semi-prisoner, but will always enjoy freedom, which is solid and complete, at liberty to be his own master, and higher than all others. For what can be above the man who is above fortune? Livius Drusus, a bold and vigorous man, had proposed laws in which he renewed the evil policy of the Gracchi, and he was supported by a huge crowd from all over Italy. But he could see no successful outcome for his measures, which he could neither carry nor abandon once embarked upon, and he is said to have cursed the turbulent life which he had always lived, saying that he alone had never had a holiday, even as a child. For For while still a ward and dressed as a youth, he ventured to speak to a jury in favour of some accused men, and to acquire influence in the court of law with so much effect that, as we all know, he was forced to certain verdicts favourable to his clients. To what lengths would so precocious an ambition not go? You may have known that such a premature boldness would result in terrible trouble, both public and private. So he was too late in complaining that he had never had a holiday, since from his boyhood he had been a serious troublemaker in the forum. It is uncertain whether he died by his own hand, for he collapsed after receiving a sudden wound in the groin. Some people doubting whether his death was self-inflicted, but no one doubting that it was timely. It would be superfluous to mention any more who, though seemingly to others the happiest of mortals, themselves bore true witness against themselves by their expressed hatred of every action in their lives. Yet they did not change themselves or anyone else by these complaints, for after the explosion of words, their feelings reverted to normal. Assuredly, your lives, even if they last more than 1,000 years, will shrink into the tiniest span. Those vices will swallow up any space of time. The actual time you have, which reason can prolong, though it naturally passes quickly, inevitably escapes you rapidly. For you do not grasp it, or hold it back, or try to delay the swiftest of all things, but you let it slip away as though it was something superfluous and replaceable. But among the worst offenders I count those who spend all their time in drinking and lust, for these are the worst preoccupations of all. Other people, even if they are possessed by an illusionary semblance of glory, suffer from a respectable delusion. You can give me a list of miserly men, or hot-tempered men, who indulge in unjust hatreds or wars, but they are all sinning in a more manly way. It is those who are on a headlong course of gluttony and lust who are stained with dishonour. Examine how all these people spend their time, how long they devote to their accounts, to laying traps for others or fearing for those laid for themselves, to paying court to others or to being courted themselves, to giving or receiving bail, to banquets, which now count as official business. You will see how their activities, good or bad, do not give them even time to breathe. Finally, it is generally agreed that no activity can be successfully pursued by an individual who is preoccupied, not rhetoric or liberal studies, since the mind when distracted absorbs nothing deeply, but rejects everything which is, so to speak, crammed into it. Living is the least important activity of the preoccupied man, yet there is nothing which is harder to learn. There are many instructors in the other arts to be found everywhere. Indeed, some of these arts mere boys have grasped so thoroughly that they can even teach them. But learning how to live takes a whole life, and, which may surprise you more, it takes a whole life to learn how to die. So many of the finest men have put aside all their encumbrances, renouncing riches and business and pleasure, and made it their one aim up to the end of their lives to know how to live. Yet most of these have died confessing that they did not know. Still less can those others know. Believe me, it is a sign of the great man, and one who is above human error, not to allow his time to be frittered away. He has the longest possible life simply because whatever time was available, he devoted entirely to himself. None of it lay fallow and neglected, none of it under another's control. For being an extremely thrifty guardian of his time, he never found anything for which it was worth exchanging. so he had enough time. But those whose lives in the public have made great inroads inevitably have too little. Nor must you think that such people do not sometimes recognize their loss. Indeed, you will hear many of those whom great prosperity is a burden, sometimes crying out amidst their hordes of clients, or their pleadings in law courts, or their other honourable miseries. It's impossible to live. Of course it's impossible. All those who will call to themselves draw you away from yourself. How many days has that defendant stolen from you, or that candidate, or that old lady worn out with burying her heirs, or that man shamming an illness to excite the greed of legacy hunters, or that influential friend who keeps people like you, not for friendship but for display. Mark off, I tell you, and review the days of your life. You will see that very few, the useless remnants, have been left to you. One man who has achieved the badge of office he coveted longs to lay it aside and keeps repeating, "Will this year never end?" Another man thought it a great coup to win the chance of giving games, but having given them, he says, "When shall I be rid of them?" That advocate is grabbed on every side throughout the forum, and fills the whole place with a huge crowd extending further than he can be heard. But he says, "When will the vacation come?" Everyone hustles his life along and is troubled by longing for the future and weariness of the present. But the man who spends all his time on his own needs, who organises every day as though it were his last, neither longs for nor fears the next day. For what new pleasures can any hour now bring him? He has tried everything and enjoyed everything to repletion. For the rest, fortune can dispose as she likes. His life is now secure. Nothing can be taken from this life, and you can only add to it as if giving to a man who is already full and satisfied, food which he does not want but can hold. So you must not think a man has lived long, because he has white hair and wrinkles. He has not lived long, just existed long. For suppose you should think that a man had had a long voyage, who had been caught in a raging storm as he left the harbour, and carried hither and thither, and driven round and round in a circle by the rage of opposing winds. He did not have a long voyage, just a long tossing about.